Since his beginnings on this planet, man has felt compelled to make pictorial representations of the world around him. But throughout all of man's history, it's only during the last 100 years that he's been able to create pictures that appear to move in the way in which things move in the real world. The cinema has become part of our everyday lives. But the truth about the motion picture is that it's really no more than a carefully contrived assembly of fixed images. When movie film is exposed, the camera takes a number of still pictures each second. These still pictures are then reproduced by means of a projector running at constant speed. The human eye itself creates the missing link, the sense of movement. When the eye sees images projected at speeds slower than 10 a second, it's able to separate them. But at speeds greater than 10 a second, the retina starts to maintain a constant impression which is not lost between one image and the next. It's in this way that the illusion of motion is created. Reproduction of movements in the real world is not the only possibility that the cinema has to offer. If an artist photographs, image by image, 24 pieces of artwork and then projects them, movement also seems to take place. But this time, it is not real movement reconstituted by projection, but rather movement which is created for the first time on the cinema screen. A great deal of time and patience is required to create an animated film. A minute on the screen can require up to 1,440 individual drawings, each slightly different from the last. What the movie camera with its shutter does automatically, the animator must do by hand. This is why animation has been defined not as the art of drawings that move, but the art of movements that are drawn. John Grayson was a Scotsman, born in 1898 into a fiercely intellectual middle-class family. He decided, after a brilliant but conventional academic education, to turn his talents to the developing craft of the cinema. He soon saw that film could be used as a social and educational tool and became recognized as the father of the British documentary film. In 1939, Mackenzie King, Prime Minister of Canada, invited Grayson to start a government film studio in Ottawa.
The film board was a deliberate creation to do a deliberate work. The work could be written out in the form of an act of parliament and was. It was there to bring Canada alive to itself and to the rest of the world. It was there to declare the excellences of Canada to Canadians and to the rest of the world. It was there to evoke the strengths of Canada, the imagination of Canadians in respect of creating their present and their future.
The National Film Board of Canada was set up in an abandoned sawmill on the Ottawa River, and Grayson's first task was to staff it with young Canadians. But within months, war had broken out. The Germans were already using film brilliantly as an instrument of propaganda, and now the National Film Board's activities took on a new significance. Grayson's task was to direct Canadian film support for the Allied war effort. Before coming to Canada, Grayson had worked with another young Scotsman, Norman McLaren, who was already making promising animation films. And by 1941, Grayson had decided that McLaren's type of animation could be of use to the National Film Board.
Grierson asked me to come up. I was working in New York. And I was afraid, in one way, to come up. I'd worked with Grierson before, and I knew he's a wonderful person, very stimulating for an artist like myself. But it was being wartime, I was afraid I'd be switched to doing hard sell war propaganda films. And I told him this, and he said, no, come up. I said, what am I to do? He said, just hang around. You'll find plenty to do. So I hung around for a few weeks. And then one day I was called into the commissioner's office and said, can you have an animated film in your own style, do it your own way, paint it on film or whatever way you want, but it's got to be ready in 2 or 3 weeks' time for mail early for Christmas. And that was, I think, the first animated film that the Film Board made. 2 minutes. I painted straight on the film, with pen and India ink, and superimposed some backgrounds. I had to find some music very quickly, so I got Jingle Bells by Benny Goodman, and it got done on time.
It was now suggested to McLaren that he train other young artists in the animation techniques. This was the beginning of an important school of animation, and the sense of pioneering was strong.
How I found artists was this, that I'd go to the head of the art school and tell him the kind of work animation was and the kind of artists I need. And he'd say, well, I have 2 or 3 people. In fact, at Montreal, he said, I have 2 very good people probably for you, and I met the 2 people whom I got, René Jaudoin and Jean-Paul Ladouceur, and talked with them for about an hour or so about their feelings about dancing, movement, music, anything but their own work. Their own work told me the kind of taste they had and their technical drawing ability. So they were the nucleus, the 3 of us. Now, during 42 and 43, Yves Lambert, who had had a training in the Royal Ontario College of Art, came to the board as a letterer of titles. But she hadn't been doing that for long before the board required a person to make maps. So Yves specialized in animated maps.
And so our whole conception of the world we live in changes. For in this new era of flight, the old-fashioned flap maps of our school days will no longer present a true picture of the Earth. Henceforth, we shall have to see our planet as the airman sees it, as a globe. Looking at the new air map, we see that in the northern half of this globe are 9/10 of the world's people, most of its largest cities. And they say that the Americas will soon be joined to Europe and to Asia by aerial trade routes, crossing Canada, crossing the pole, crossing the spaces of Siberia, all in a few flight hours.
At one of the art schools in Toronto, I found George Dunning and Jim Mackay, who came almost together. So we were now 5 animators. I remember we started making En roulant ma boule, Jim Mackay did it. I thought obviously the technique for it was cutouts. And he grasped the idea very quickly and animated, and I just keep an eye on things.
The technique of the animated cutout used by Jim Mackay and En roulant was often used by film board animators during these early years. Figures to be cut out were drawn and often jointed, as with Grant Munro's clown and duck, so that they could be moved frame by frame beneath the animation camera.
Hello. We're going to sing the next song as a round, and I'm here to explain it to you. Here's the room, here's the screen, and here are all you people.
One of Grierson's concerns was to bring audiences in remote areas of Canada into contact with the cinema. He asked the animators to make versions of well-known songs so that audiences could sing along. Grierson reasoned that this would unite people in the often makeshift cinemas and allow them to share in what was happening on the screen. The techniques were usually simple and always direct.
Roll your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Roll your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Roll your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 roll your boat gently down the stream.
One of the last and most sophisticated of these animated songs was George Dunning's Cadet Roussel. It's still considered a fine example of cutout animation.
Un pour chaque face, un pour la queue. Mais quand il va voir sa maîtresse, il met tous les trois en tresse. Ah, 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 mais vraiment, Cadet Roussel est bon enfant. Cadet Roussel a trois habits, Cadet Roussel a trois habits. Deux jaune l'autre en papier gris, deux jaune l'autre en papier gris. Il met celui-ci quand il gèle, ou quand il pleut, ou quand il grêle. Ah, 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 mais vraiment, Cadet Roussel est bon enfant. Cadet Roussel a trois épées, Cadet Roussel a trois épées. L'une est très longue, l'autre rouillée, l'une est très longue.
During this early period, Norman McLaren had a profound influence on the animators he was training. Without forcing his style upon them, he was able to stimulate the development of their attitudes and craftsmanship in an enduring way.
I don't know what Norman was looking for in people, but he certainly was able to instill, is that the right word, into people an appreciation of the nature of animated films. And not so much by theory of attitude, but just by the way he approached the work, like a very good Scotsman, by the sheer economy of means. The film board is largely, this sits on two Scotsmen, Grierson and McLaren, and the traditional thing about Scotland, they're very, very econome. They did things with imagination, I suppose, and with the means that are available. I think that was the striking thing to me is when I first came to the board, there's nothing, there's just a table and pencils and paper, a few films that had been done by McLaren and the few first members of the animation department. So the whole thing was very, very natural, very uncomplicated and stimulating.
Relax. Here's a chance to tap your feet.
In this film, Billy Mackay used a pen to draw directly on clear 35mm film. This was the technique used by McLaren in all his early films at the Film Board, but now, in Begone Dull Care, he used 35mm film in a different way. McLaren and Eve Lambert applied colors on both sides of the film, using brushes, sponges, and sprays, as well as engraving some images directly on the film. The music for Begone Dull Care was specially composed by Oscar Peterson. At about this time, there arrived in North America one of the masters of the European animated film, Alexander Alexeyev, who came with his American wife and close collaborator, Claire Parker, to live near New York. Alexeyev is unique in the field of animation. On the artistic side, he's created such wonders as Night on the Bear Mountain, and on the technical side, he's invented his pin screen. This device, with hundreds of thousands of movable steel pins, allows the animation of light, shade, and texture. With the pins fully out, a rich black is obtained. With the pins partially out, a range of grays, and with the pins fully in, white is obtained. When McLaren heard Alexeyev was in the United States, he sought Gerson's approval for him to create a film for the board on his pin screen. The result was En Passant. This early involvement with the Film Board has an important sequel. In 1972, Alexeyev and Claire Parker agreed to construct a pin screen for the National Film Board and came to Montreal from Paris to set it up and teach the Film Board's animators how to use it.
No, it's bad. May I ask you now to take away the white line around the cupola? Now, oh God, really, I think that's great. Don't you think it's great?
He said, in allowing us to have a screen of his, that he felt there's no other place in the world he could think of that would be a better house, a better environment, and better people around it. because I do know that he had fears that when he dies, the screen will die and the technique will die with it. Now we have someone, Jacques Drouin, who is carrying on, who has taken to it, in fact, like a fish to water, and is creating a very interesting film on the screen.
In 1949, Norman McLaren developed a new animation technique which he called pixelation.
It meant using a camera that takes a single picture, a single frame at a time. And between each frame being taken, you move the object in front of the camera, or move whatever it is. If it's a person, you move the person. Take these chairs over there. Now, if you had an animation camera, you could make them, if we wanted to sit on them, you could make them come to us. Or, on the other hand, we can do it the other way around. The film Neighbors uses this type of animation quite a lot, the animation people.
Neighbors was awarded an Oscar in 1952. Music without instruments was made for the film by photographing black and white patterns on the soundtrack area at the edge of the film. Since the patterns are shot frame by frame, like any animation, McLaren calls it animated sound. An influence that was important to a number of the film board's animators was that of the UPA studio in the United States. Up until this time, the complicated animation techniques of the great Walt Disney cartoons of the 30s and 40s had been beyond the means of the National Film Board. The UPA studio, of Mr. Magoo fame, was formed by some animators who broke away from the costly Disney operation. They wanted to produce a new sort of animation based on a sharper sense of humor and with a new technical simplicity. Seeing their work, encouraged some of the film board's animators to try a similar directness of approach, using the cell animation technique of creating movement by painting on multiple layers of cellulose sheets. Their first production made in this way was The Romance of Transportation.
By the end of the 18th century, fleets of bateaux, as they were called after the French bateau, plied an extensive lake and river system made more navigable by circumventing waterfalls with canals and locks. In the face of the growing importance of sea transport, there was one fact that the men whose whole livelihood was in sail little realized. The days of the poetic sailing ship, dependent on the vagaries of the wind, were numbered. A new and more manageable power had been unveiled in Europe, which was to rock the traditional concepts of transportation in North America to their very foundation. The Industrial Revolution had come to Canada.
This new inspiration now began to influence other film board animators. In his adaptation of a Stephen Leacock story, Gerald Potterton used greatly simplified cutouts.
He turned the key in the lock. "We are safe from interruption here," he said. "Sit down." We both sat down and looked at each other. I found no voice to speak. "You are one of Pinkerton's men, I presume," he said. He had gathered from my mysterious manner that I was a detective. I knew what he was thinking, and it made me worse. "No, not from Pinkerton's," I said, seeming to imply that I came from a rival agency. "To tell the truth," I went on, as if I'd been prompted to lie about it, "I'm not a detective at all. I've come to open an account. I intend to keep all my money in this bank." The manager looked relieved, but still serious. He concluded now that I was a son of Baron Rothschild or a young Gould. "A large account, I suppose," he said. "Fairly large," I whispered. "I propose to deposit $56 now and $50 a month regularly." The manager got up and opened the door. He called to the accountant. "Mr. Montgomery," he said, unkindly loud, "this gentleman is opening an account. He will deposit $56. Good morning." I rose. A big iron door stood open at the side of the room. "Good morning," I said, and stepped into the safe.
In the mid-1950s, Colin Law and Sidney Goldsmith, each